Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of What the Franchise, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually with these videos I'm talking about pain points within franchise mode, why they're pain points, and what needs to be done to improve upon them. But today I want to talk about something a little bit different but still pertaining to franchise mode. So if you haven't seen it yet, there was an interview done by Zan with Madden's new senior producer Carlos Guerrero. It's a really good interview and I encourage you all to go and check it out if you haven't seen it already, and I'll be sure to link that in the description. But the reason why I'm making this video is because there was something that he said pertaining to franchise mode and the franchise community that kind of caught my attention, and it was a bit disappointing to hear. So if you go to around the 19-minute mark, the 19.5-minute mark, Carlos says, one of the things that I hear a lot of is nobody gives any love to franchise. It's all about Ultimate Team. The focus is all about that, and it's not really. When you think about it, franchise, there are things that are put in for franchise, but it's never enough. Now, obviously that last part is what stuck out to me, and I'm going to get to that, but just to run through the whole statement, I'm not one that personally buys into the whole MUT versus CFM thing. MUT might feel like it's the focus, but I don't think what happens with MUT really has any bearing on what happens with CFM, at least when it comes to the development of the game. I think once you get into post-launch support, that argument maybe becomes a bit more valid, but that's kind of the nature of any game. And overall, when I look at it, CFM isn't in the state it's in because of MUT. It's where it's at because of the direction they've chosen to take since it was first introduced as Connected Careers mode. This is going to be the 7th year of CFM, and that is plenty of time to make a mode pretty much anything that you want it to be. But I think they chose a poor direction from the beginning, and I think the execution has also been poor along the way. So when it comes to the whole MUT CFM thing, I'd rather hold CFM accountable than just blame MUT for its shortcomings. That being said though, with what happened this past year between virtually nothing being done to CFM and so many resources being taken to work on Longshot and then NBA Live of all things, it doesn't exactly help the case for, or help break that perception that there isn't being any love shown towards franchise mode. Now to the second part of the statement where he says there are things that are put in for franchise but it's never enough, and that's the part I took a bit of an issue with, and I really wish he would have expanded upon what exactly he meant, or maybe why he felt it might be that way. He did go on to say that everybody wants different things and what would be put in for one segment doesn't appeal to the other segment, but that's hardly something that is going to be unique to franchise mode. And if you look at any other area of the game, whether it be gameplay, MUT, long shot, whatever, there's always going to be that kind of dynamic. And I'd argue that when compared to an area like gameplay, the distance or difference between those segments is going to be way more diverse and potentially divisive when compared to the segments that exist within CFM. So to hear him be so dismissive towards franchise mode and almost kind of imply that it doesn't matter what they do or what they add, that the community's still gonna not be happy or is always gonna complain, was a bit unfortunate, because while I do understand what he's saying, I don't necessarily agree with it, and I'm not sure if he knows or fully understands why the community might feel or be that way. And that's not some kind of shot at him or anything. If you listen to the interview, he mentions that he spends the majority of his time playing Madden within MUT and Play Now, and if you're not a franchise player or you're a casual franchise player, you're more than likely not gonna know or be as in touch with the frustrations of the people that have put in the time and are only playing that mode or have only been playing that mode for years. And this isn't anything new either. I think there was the same problem before with Rex. If you guys have been to my CFM post on OS, you might remember that the very first line at the top of the post is CFM is already good, and that's something that Rex tweeted out. And the reality is that he really had no reason not to say something like that, because as he also mentioned in the same tweet, more people played franchise longer than ever in Madden 17. But I had the exact same kind of issue with that comment as I do here, and that comment was essentially the reason why I created that CFM post and made it as in-depth and extensive as I did. It was basically an attempt to try and show that there was more to it than just the numbers, and while their numbers might say franchise is good, when you really get into how much is missing, how poorly certain things work, and how much more depth could or should be there, that maybe it's not as good as those numbers might say, or that those numbers are really only scratching the surface of what they could be. And I think it's kind of the same thing here. It's like, okay, you say with franchise it's never enough, but I think if you're going to go out and say that, you also have to ask why it's never enough and why people are frustrated with the love that franchise mode may or may not be getting. You can put all the things you want into franchise mode, but it doesn't inherently make those things good or mean that those things are significantly, or in some cases even doing anything to push the mode forward. And when you go back and you start to focus on those things and those features that have been put into franchise mode, you don't always come away with a positive impression of them. This past year pretty much felt like a lost year because there wasn't much done to franchise. But again, you go back to Long Shot and then NBA Live along with Frostbite, and it makes some sense why we didn't get many things. But then you go back to Madden 17 with Big Decisions and Play the Moment, where both were more or less a reskin of what was already there. With Big Decisions, the only new thing really was the ability to bring a player back from injury and then the coach's season goal. Neither of which really plays a significant role or a factor over the course of a CFM. And then it was pretty much the same thing with Play the Moment, where Super Sim was tuned, but everything that could be done with Play the Moment could be done the year prior with Super Sim. Then you move over to other things from Madden 17 like game planning, where it talked this big game about strategy and tendency tracking, but then when you dig into it you realize it doesn't work at all if you're playing the CPU, and then it tracks virtually the least amount of data possible for the user. Practice squads, a great addition and one of those things I constantly wanted to see make it into CFM, but again, you get into the game, you go to start a franchise with accurate rosters, and you quickly realize that over half the guys that are on your favorite team's practice squad aren't even eligible in game because the rules are wrong. You go back to Madden 16 where we get another thing with drive goals, and that was something that ended up pretty much rendering the game unplayable for the first month or so after release and is now barely even part of CFM. You go back to the very beginning and how much tweaking, tuning, and changing that has needed to be done to the XP system, because every year there's new huge issues that have to be fixed. So when you look back at so many of these things that were put into franchise, it's never really been an issue about quantity. Outside of last year, the feature list is usually pretty strong in terms of quantity. It's consistently been about the direction and even more so the execution of those features and those things that franchise is getting, as well as their impact or lack thereof on the mode. I don't really care if we only get 2 or 3 things every year. If those things are well thought out, they work properly and add to the longevity of franchise mode. But when the mode has consistently churned out features that don't do that, and then on top of that end up having serious issues with how they function, you're damn right it's never going to be enough, and I don't think it ever should be as long as that's the case. Was it asking too much to not have the AI drafting 5 QBs in the first couple of rounds of the draft? Because we're only about a year removed from that being the case. Is wanting the same amount of depth and authenticity within franchise mode that is provided by other sports games some kind of irrational pipe dream? You don't have other games out here going out of their way to take shots at your franchise mode because it's never enough, or because people's expectations are too high and their requests are unreasonable, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of those requests that you find on people's wish lists each year are things that were already in Madden years ago and were removed. I think I'm going to wrap it up there though, because it probably just sounds like I'm bitching at this point, but it's frustrating, man. I feel like there was a ton of progress made and momentum gained for franchise over the last year, and back to like what I mentioned with the CFM is already good comment, I felt like as a community we were able to come together and kind of tear that down and break down that barrier and grab their attention and help them understand some of the frustrations that a lot of us have and have had for so many years with franchise mode. But hearing something like that makes it feel like it's almost right back to square one again. But I guess the reality is that it's all just wait and see at this point. The feedback isn't going to stop and the voice isn't going to get any more quiet on my end. So if the label's going to be it's never enough, then so be it. I'll continue to be here to show and explain every reason why it isn't enough if that's what it's going to take. Just to clarify though, this type of video isn't going to be a regular thing. There's going to be a lot of interviews like this with the devs that come out over the next few weeks, but I'm not going to sit here and continue to dissect one-liners like this. That line just kind of irked me a little bit, and given that Madden is in a bit of a leadership transition, that was just about the last thing I wanted to hear when it came to franchise mode, so I felt like I needed to touch on it. But next week I'm gonna have a channel update going over some things that I have planned for content. I was originally gonna have that this week, but I wanted to squeeze this video in. There will be another Beyond the Blueprint next week, most likely on the CFM ticker, but that could end up changing as well. But let me know your guys' thoughts on the interview and how you feel about the future of franchise mode after seeing this interview. I know I ranted a little bit, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.